Now, the recent political climate could cast a dark cloud over the country's economy. Now, of course, we are now joined by our analyst, Grant Harris, who's actually a former senior director for Africa in White House. And, of course, also with us is none other than Suraya Aziz Suleiman, who's a business and human rights defender. Suraya, I want to start with you, first of all, as a Congolese citizen yourself. The December 30th poll was actually supposed to mark DRC's first democratic transfer of power in 59 years. But of course, looking at the twists and turns that we're seeing today, as far as this political stalemate that we can see today is concerned, what does this portend for the thousands and millions of Congolese who actually woke up early in the morning to go and cast their ballot with the hope that they will be able to get justice from the ballot as far as a peaceful transfer of power is concerned?
Thank you very much, Eugene. I think this is a victory for the people because, as you've rightly pointed out, in the last decade, the last 2 decades actually, the situation was really deteriorating in Congo and there was a lack of trust from investors. But we are with the election, just with the election, and it's a provisional result, the exchange rate has already gone very well for the Congolese franc. That has picked up some value. We went from $1 being 1,700 to 1,300, and that was just like a spontaneous market response. And I think that we will see an improvement on that. So it's really hope, a feeling of hope that is in the Congo because the old regime is gone and we have the opposition in power now, and we hope that they will do a better job than their predecessors.
Right. Before we go to Grant Harris, Soraya, while I still have you here, the picture you paint is a picture of hope. But when you go out here, some people still seem to be having a feeling of skepticism. They kind of feel that there is a crisis in Congo because, one, the electoral body announced a winner who the Catholic Church say is not actually the legitimate winner. We've seen the Western nations casting a doubt on that particular vote. But here you are saying that there seems to be hope for the economy, that there's a new person in office who's actually from the opposition. Could you explain that to us, first of all, for those who don't really understand what's actually happening down in the Congo today?
I want to point out something. The first thing is the Electoral Commission was totally, I would say, very much under the control of the ruling party. So we had an independent observer from the
Right, Grant, if you're still there with us, Grant, first of all, you have worked closely on African matters under the Obama administration as the Senior Director for Africa in the White House. I want you to help us understand the rationale when Western nations start speaking out on electoral processes down here in Africa. We have people who always feel that the Western nations are actually meddling in African affairs. At what point do we draw the line between meddling and actual genuine concerns from Western nations over elections here in Africa?
Thank you for having me on your show. I think that this is a momentous time in the Congo. What could happen here would be the first peaceful transfer of power in the entire history of the country. But as our fellow panelists had said, the Electoral Commission, which is heavily under the thumb of the current president, Kabila, has announced a winner that many doubt whether Felix Tshisekedi actually got the bulk of the votes or received that percentage that was announced. And so it's an interesting time because an Electoral Commission has announced the opposition candidate, Felix Tshisekedi, as the winner, but Martin Fayulu is claiming that he actually received 61% of the vote. Now, I know your question goes to Western powers, but I think the real issue of what's going on is the data and the polling information that the Catholic Church has, because they sent 40,000 observers to all of the polls, and so they have very good insight and information into what actually happened. And then what is really historically significant to me, you've got regional states that are saying that there should be a recount. The Southern African Development Community, the International Community for the Great Lakes Region, Conference for the Great Lakes Region, have both said in the last 2 days that they have questions about what happened, and they're urging a recount to ensure a fair process.
Right, but Grant, on the flip side, what do you speak of the critics of, those Western powers? Whenever they speak about African elections, they criticize. Some people in Africa say that even the U.S. itself has had its own electoral problems, and none of the Africans, even the African Union itself, has pronounced itself on the electoral processes of Western nations. What do you speak to this kind of criticisms when it comes to Western nations talking down on Africa as far as the electoral process are concerned?
I think it's important to avoid generalizations on either side. No country has perfect elections. There's a role for observers. There's a role for an independent eye to what's happening in country. And I think that there's a role within African countries to welcome observers from abroad. I think there's needs to be humility from the United States and other countries that continue to try to perfect their processes as well. I think in this case, in the Congo and the election, what the Catholic Church in country has and has observed and what regional states are saying is more of the story than what France or Belgium or other Western states have to say. They've raised concerns, and I think that's important, but when you've got the Catholic Church having sent out 40,000 observers, that really limits the hand of the Congolese government to try to tweak the results. But the question here is, did President Kabila reach a backroom deal with opposition candidate Felix Tshisekedi? The preferred candidate of the regime, Emmanuel Shadari, did not perform well. And so what people are saying is, based on this polling information and data, some believe it would be highly improbable or even statistically impossible for Felix Tshisekedi to have received this amount of the vote, given what polls and polling information during the vote and before the vote had indicated.
Right. I hear Soraya is back with us. Soraya, I just want to bring you on this. SADC is the latest voice on this particular electoral process in the DRC. They say that a recount will actually bring or provide the necessary reassurances for both the winners and the losers. Do you agree? Do you see a recount being the solution or the way forward for the DRC?
I want to clarify something, Eugene. The SADC wants a recount not because of the presidential, which they've congratulated already, and they want a recount particularly for the legislatives, because the parliamentary elections, because that is when we see a trend that is not normal. In the last years, the majority would be like 100 out of 500 or 120 out of 500. And right now we have something very close to 300, which doesn't look right. But both the Catholic Church and other observers and the SADC never questioned the legitimacy of Felix Tshisekedi. What they said was that their numbers were different. They didn't say that the one who came in front was different, and particularly the Senko, which is the Catholic Church, was very, very careful to say that only CENI can say who is the legitimate winner, and that they never disclose the numbers that they had to anyone. They also recognized in a recent interview that they didn't have all the vote from the polling stations. They only had 13 million out of 23 million, and their projection was like a tendency. To me, it's like a statistical evidence, but based on very, very, very heavy sampling, because they didn't have all the results. The only person who claims to have all the results is CENI, which is the Electoral Commission. And I think what the Catholic Church did was an estimate. I don't even think that's what they said themselves. And all the poll stations that were conducted before, to me, were biased, heavily biased, because they were conducted by people very, very close to the supporters of Martin Fayulu. So it's very hard at this point, having no international observers and the national observers being only partially in the polling station. It will be very hard to find the truth. So yes,
right.
A recount would help, it will delay further the process. So we will be in for a longer time in the post-electoral mood, but maybe that could help indeed.
Right. But moving forward, there are those who feel that we've had some statements that probably Tshisekedi must have or might have actually reached a backdoor deal with President Kabila so that, you know, he's not tried for any atrocities that he may have committed while in office, and probably this is why the election was rigged in his favor. I want to read your thoughts on that analysis. Right, we seem to have lost Soraya right there. Harris, if you're still with us, I want to hear from you what you think about, some people are saying that we need to see a power-sharing deal sort of arrangement where winner doesn't take it all, and probably this is what would be able to help the DRC, you know, come to terms with the electoral process. But others are arguing that if we see a power-sharing deal here, then we could be setting a precedent where the losers of an election still get to power or still get to enjoy power, and so making the electoral process not as competitive as it should be. We saw in Kenya when we had a power-sharing deal, a government of national unity between the opposition and the party in power. Is this a trend that you're trying to see coming up, where losers of an election still get to power? And is this what you feel would be a solution to these problems that we continue to see as far as power is concerned?
SADC, the Southern African Development Community, has suggested this as a potential solution. And I think that it bears noting that this is incredibly significant that two regional communities have called for a recount. I have a slightly different view than my fellow panelists about this, but the important point is these are regional communities and regional players that sometimes in past elections have really worked more towards stability and continuity than they have toward staking out views that would really seek a recount or try to protect the democratic process. SADC, for instance, has received criticism in the past for endorsing elections in Zimbabwe that were inherently flawed in how they were conducted. So the fact to me that Angola, Republic of Congo, South Africa, countries that have traditionally worked very closely and been aligned with the Democratic Republic of Congo are making these calls for a recount, that is significant in terms of their confidence in the process. For me personally, I'm wary of going initially and quickly towards a government of national unity, because sometimes that is suggested as a lowest common denominator or what is seen as the process or path of least opposition. And I think that here you've got millions of Congolese who stood in line, who worked hard, who suffered through a process that was heavily biased, through a broader electoral environment that was not as fair and as open as it should be. And I think that those votes need to be counted and those voices need to be heard. And so I think we are not at the point where we should rush to a government of national unity. I think first the Constitutional Court should hear the claim of Martin Fayulu, realizing that the Constitutional Court has been aligned with and is closely affiliated with President Kabila. That might not be the right outcome, but I think that working more closely with the Catholic Church, understanding more of the polling data that exists, looking at a recount, at other options, and if needed, a revote. But I don't think that we should rush towards a government of national unity at this moment in time.
Right, right, right. Therefore, Harris, I want you to help us. How do you neutralize the thoughts or the claims that actually Congo seems to be at the deepest heart of the United States, and the argument being that Congo's minerals are actually on target here, because we saw the United States, Donald Trump confirming that troops were sent near the border of Congo just for in case of any eventualities. How do you diffuse the sense that probably Congo is actually ripe because of its minerals, and that is why the Western nations, particularly the US, is actually really concerned about what is happening in there?
I think that is easy to pick apart. The United States here is doing what it does in many elections around the world, and it's trying to speak out in favor of the process, it's monitoring it, and it has its views. And that's something that I think is helpful. I don't think it's linked to the Congo having minerals. I don't think it's linked to other factors like this, because this is the same type of process and voice and opinion and observation that the United States government does in many countries where there are not minerals, where there are not natural resources and the like. Yes, the Trump administration did deploy some U.S. military to Gabon in the eventuality that there might be strife or unrest in the Congo. That's something that I think is a wise move, but this is a very small number of people, and it's critical that your audience understand the goal. This would be in case there was large-scale unrest and the U.S. Embassy or U.S. citizens needed to be evacuated from the country. When I was the senior advisor to President Obama, we would sometimes make preemptive moves like that to position forces in case of civil strife or eventualities. I was involved in evacuating embassies in the Central African Republic, in considering whether to evacuate our embassy in South Sudan and elsewhere. So this is something that is separate from observing the polls or the election. I don't think that this is a case where Western governments...
I'm told that's all the time we have for this particular conversation, but indeed, we want to say thank you for making time to be part of this conversation, which we will be able to have in due course. Thank you for making time to speak to us on CNBC. Also, thank you so much to Soraya, who we lost